Hello everyone, I'm Dennis from Boulder Sounds. Welcome to this video walkthrough of our new sample library for Kontakt. The sample library is entitled Dolceola, D-O-L-C-E-O-L-A. This is a Dolceola sitting in front of me. It was an instrument made by the Toledo Symphony Company in the early 1900s. It's a pretty rare instrument. I learned about this instrument from a composer in New York City named Doug Maxwell. He's an Emmy Award-winning composer. He's also one of my customers. He contacted me and said, hey, I have this instrument that's been in my family for many years, and I think it would be really a nice addition to your sample library catalog. So Doug was kind enough to sell it to me. The interesting thing about this instrument is it's basically a zither or a dulcimer with a keyboard attached to it. The keyboard itself is actually non-linear. The top part of the keyboard from here moves up in half steps, just like a traditional keyboard. The bottom half of the keyboard, though, is a chordal section. And we have these skinny keys, two thin keys side by side, and then a fat key. The thin keys are assigned to root, third, or fifth of the chord, and then the fat key triggers 3 strings simultaneously that are tuned like a chord. So I'll try to demonstrate that to you without dropping it. So the skinny key that I was referring to, here's an example. Here's another thin key right next to it. And then here's the chordal key. So you do all your chordal accompaniment down here, and then the top 2 octaves. You play your melodies. So the challenge was, how do we present this instrument and be somewhat faithful to what it does in a virtual instrument? So we came up with 2 approaches. We sampled it and presented it as a linear instrument, just like you would play on a normal keyboard, 4 octaves from low to high and half steps. But we also have a virtual version where you can turn on a chord button, and there's an octave where you can just trigger the chords, and you can program those half steps to whatever chords you want to be triggered. And then we have an extra octave below that to trigger single bass notes. So you have a lot of flexibility in terms of key. You can play in any key, whereas on this instrument you can't. The instrument has a charming kind of old-timey honky-tonk kind of quality to it, which you're about to hear. So thanks for watching, and let's dive in. So right now I have the Dolceola main instrument loaded up. There's 2 other instruments. The other 2 are kind of like bonus instruments. One is called muted, and the one besides that is called Harmonics. In each instrument we have an instrument panel and an effects panel. And then for each panel we have sub-pages in this lower right-hand corner drop-down menu for each panel. So for right now I'll mostly focus on the instrument main page. And if you want mouse hover over help enabled, make sure the eye is highlighted here. Then when you put your mouse over any button or knob in the lower left-hand corner of Kontakt, it'll tell you the function of that button or knob. Also, we have included snapshots with this library. They're not automatically installed. You have to install them yourself, and I'll do a separate video on that and put it up on YouTube. You can just search Boulder Sounds Dolceola snapshots, and that video will come up. But just to show you briefly, once they're installed, you'll click on the camera icon, snapshot. Below the title of the NKI, it says no snapshot loaded. Push on the button here, and then there are your snapshots that we've made for the main Dolceola instrument. And like I said, I'll do that in a separate video. You may already know how to do that. Okay, so what you're looking at now in blue are the main keys of the Dolceola. This is in linear mode, so this is like a normal keyboard from low to high. So let's just give it a listen. Now, if I turn the chords off button to on, notice what happens on the keyboard display. We have an octave of purple notes. These are now the chord octaves. So, and when I play a note, Notice in the display, it jumps to whatever key I'm playing. The idea with this is, you play the bass line with the lower octave. However, we can assign our own chords to each of those keys in that octave, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, if I turn that off, it takes me back to the main page. Below that, we have octave button. So if you turn that on, we get this sound. So what that does is it duplicates the samples of the keyboard, but an octave lower, layered against the original pitch samples. So we get this kind of chorusing type effect, which is pretty cool. Below that, we have knobs for key noise. So the default setting is what it loads as. So if we turn that up, the down key noise, I'll crank it up so you can hear it better. You can hear that percussive quality. So you can lower that or just simply turn it off if you don't care for it, or just adjust the amount you need. And then the key up also had a noise to it, so I'll turn that up so you can hear that a little better. And if we don't want that, we can just turn both of those off. And then you simply have no key noise at all. If you want to set it back to the default setting, you command click on the knob. On the PC, control click on it. On the right side of the page are the effect buttons. These are just to conveniently turn the effects on and off quickly. When you want to get into more detailed editing of the effects, you would then go to the effects tab and to the appropriate page for that particular effect. So that's the main page. So now let's take a look at the chord page. We can get there one of two ways. We can use the drop-down menu down here in the bottom right, or we can click on the chords off button and turn it on, and it takes me to the chord page. Now notice what happens in this set of vertical buttons as I play through the chord octave, which is marked in purple on your keyboard display. So what it's doing is it's triggering a button which is assigned to each half step of that particular octave. So now I can assign different chords to those particular keys. So there's my low C, and in the chord type knob, it shows me I'm using a major chord. Roman numeral 1 means in root position. If I want to change that to first inversion, I can just do Roman numeral 2. Second inversion, Roman numeral 3. If I want a minor chord, I just spin the knob further, and I have three versions of that chord. And then if I go all the way to the right, I have a diminished chord. So I can just assign whatever chords I want to those keys as long as the root note corresponds with the key I'm pressing. So you cannot assign an E flat minor chord to the F note. It has to be F major, F minor, or F diminished. Once you get your chords set up the way you want them, then you can save that as a preset with this drop-down menu here. And you can even save an entire bank if you want. Then it's written into a data file which is common to this library, so therefore you do not have to save the Kontakt instrument to save the mapping assignment of those chords. It will be there for you every time you go to work with the instrument. Below that, we have volume. What that does is you can just decrease the volume of the chords if you're doing something like this. And you realize the chords are just a bit too loud in relation to the bass notes. You can just drop it down a bit. And balance the volume whatever way you need. Below that, we have a knob called strumming. So this is something I asked Bo to put in. This is not possible on the real Dolceola. So this is in relation to the chord where 3 strings are played simultaneously, right? So this is, each note is exactly at the same time. With the strumming feature, we can turn this knob a little bit and get a little bit of a ripple in the chord, or more. That's maximum. And that you could automate that knob. If you want different degrees of strumming, you could, with a, a fader, automate that in real time if you wanted to. So that's something that was not possible on the original instrument. We just thought we would throw it in there. And then again, we have, the chords on and off button and the octave on and off. And by the way, the chords work with the octave as well. Kind of interesting with the strum. Kind of like a bit of a special effect. So that's your chord page. It's fairly straightforward, but it gives the instrument, when you start playing with it, it takes a while getting used to the mapping and playing it in real time, but you can get a pretty unique sound using the chord octave. So now let's go to the velocity page. On the velocity page, you see 8 vertical buttons, layers 1 through 8. Layer 1 is the softest dynamic level that was sampled, up to layer 8, which is the strongest, loudest, brightest velocity level that was sampled. So we can just turn these buttons on and off and experiment with different sound colors. If we want a darker sound, obviously I would turn off the higher layers. So let's just try it without layers 5 through 8 and see what it sounds like. So quite a bit darker. Let's take it all the way down to layer 1 and see what that sounds like. It's kind of nice. What if we turn on the octave? Very nice sound, I think. Once you get the setup the way you like in the layers, you can then save them as presets, just as you did on the previous chordal page. So it'll be there next time you go to work with the instrument. Below that, we have velocity control over volume. If you spin this knob all the way to the left, turning that feature off, no matter how loud or soft you play the keyboard, the volume will all be the same. If you turn it up quite high, you'll have a great deal of dynamic range based on velocity. Below that, you can engage a low-pass filter and turn that on so that when you do play very softly, the filter really closes down and makes the sound much more muted. When you play harder, the filter will open up. You can decide how active that filter will be using this knob. And that's pretty much it for the velocity layers page. So now let's move on to the settings page. On the left-hand column, we have volume control. That's a knob that just basically controls the master volume of the instrument. Below that, we have panning. We could pan the instrument, center, left, or right. And then below that, we have a stereo imaging control. And the default setting is evenly balanced left and right signal. If you want to swing this all the way to the left, you can play the Dolceola back in mono, or all the way to the right is a much more exaggerated stereo image. In the next column, we have the amplitude envelope controls. This is an important column. The parameter I tend to use most in this is the release control. So the default release is at 200 milliseconds, which is fairly quick. Give you a nice clean sound. However, if you want a much longer release to get a harp-like effect, for example, you can just crank that way up, and then it's almost like you're using a sustain pedal with the Dolceola. That's how I would tend to use it, because I'm such a bad keyboard player. It covers up all my mistakes and things, and just everything just sort of rings. But that's a very useful thing. It gives it a more of a harp, cymbalum, dulcimer kind of effect. Now we can also change the sample start. So we can start a ways into the sample, which again will give you a darker tone quality. So there's the sample start at 0%. I'm going to start a little ways into the sample now. Quite a different sound, right? Maybe turn the octave button on for that one. Quite beautiful, I think. Also, keep in mind, if you use the sample start knob and you turn it to the right and you go into the sample a ways, there's always a chance you might hit the sample at a place where there's not a zero crossing, and you might get a click. So the way you avoid that is on the attack speed, you just put a very slight fade on there, and then you can avoid any kind of, click of any kind. Okay, and then we also have, controls over other amplitude parameters like sustain, decay, and the attack curve, whether the attack fade is going to be convex or concave. And then on this same page we have chords on and off, as well as octave on and off, as well as key noise. So when you're tweaking all this stuff, it's nice to have access to those parameters on the same page so you can see how they interact with what you're doing. So that's the settings page. So now I'm going to briefly show you some of the effects features. I won't spend too much time on this. We go to the effects tab. And on the right side, we have our alignment of effects in terms of signal flow from top to bottom. We have 2 EQs, we have transient shaper, we have chorus, delay, reverb, and space IR convolution. And all you need to do is click on a button, and that will take you to that particular page to edit it. So for example, I just turned on the space IR convolution, and we have a drop-down menu here with all our space IRs. And this one was set to church. Right, and you have all your basic IR editing features down here below it. Once you get what you like, again, you can save your IR convolutions as a preset, and they'll be there ready to go next time you work on the instrument. We also have some special effects down here, which sound really quite cool with this instrument. For example, corrosive. And we'll turn up the send a little bit so you can hear it. They're just kind of cool sounding. Zipper. Okay, so and the effects are, I'm sure you guys all know about the effects, so I won't spend much time on those. So that's it with the main Dolceola. Now I'm going to load up the other 2 Dolceola instruments, the bonus instruments, and show you a little bit about those. So now what you see on your screen, I've loaded up the Dolceola muted instrument, and these were created by, playing the keyboard and reaching around on the other side of the keyboard and muting the string near the base of the string and getting a percussive effect like this. So one thing you're hearing there in that sound is you're hearing quite a bit of key noise combined with the muted string. So if we don't want the key noise, we can just turn those knobs down so there's no key noise. Right? Hey, what do you know? I can play on the black keys. Okay. So to bring those back to their default setting, I just command click on those knobs. So that's it right there. Now if I go to the velocity page, it's very similar to the velocity page of the main Dolceola instrument. We do have round robins, which you can turn on or off if you would like. You can choose a specific round robin if you like that sound to be frozen on that. And again, velocity control, key noise control on that page. Then if I go down to the settings, Again, I have volume, panning, and my amp envelope settings that I can play with to alter the sound of the muted strokes. And that's basically it, and an about page, which each Dolceola instrument has as well built into Kontakt. So now I've loaded up the last quote-unquote bonus instrument, Dolceola Harmonics. These were created by, playing the key and reaching with my hand into the string of the Dolceola at the harmonic node point at the octave and creating harmonic sounds, much the way like a guitar player would do octaves. And here's what these sound like. And these samples, by the way, they ring a long time. They're 5, 6, 7-second samples. They'll go as long as you need for most purposes. They're not loop samples. That's true of all the samples in the Dolceola library. Also, you're hearing those particular harmonic samples with the key noise samples engaged. So if I turn that down, here's what the pure harmonic sounds more like. And also you're getting a little bit of noise from my controller keyboard going directly into the microphone I'm speaking through, which is not all that helpful. And then the remaining pages on this instrument are very similar to the others. We have a velocity page, and we also have a settings page where you can tweak the amplitude envelope settings. So that's the Dolceola. Thank you for watching. It's a very unusual, cool instrument. It can really add some interesting flavor into your music. And also on a side note, it is now May of 2021 when I'm doing this video. And it has been over a year we've been in this pandemic, and it's been a really rough ride for lots of people. And I just hope you're all hanging in there, and I'm sure the year to come will be much better than the one that has just passed. So take care of yourselves, and thanks for watching.